Joining us now is Dr. Jon Carroll. He is an educator. He is an author. And he's the founder of the upcoming Jabali Academy, a new private school opening in Englewood. Dr. Carroll has spent his career working to close opportunity gaps for Black students and to ensure that identity and excellence go hand in hand in the classroom. His school will center Africa's contributions to the world, the richness of the African diaspora, and the power of culture in shaping young minds. He believes that when children see themselves reflected in what they learn, they can step confidently into leadership, into creativity, and into success. Dr. Carroll is also an extraordinary brother. He's a member of the greatest organization on earth. He's a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. He is an incredible gift to the world. I've known him for many, many years. I ain't gonna say how many because it'll make us look older than we, than we feel. But Jon or Dr. Carroll, thank you so much for joining me on Night School. Unmute yourself, good brother.
Here we go. Dr.
There
Hill,
we go.
it's a pleasure. You got me?
Yeah, got you, brother.
Appreciate the time, brother. Love what you do. Like you say, been in each other's worlds a long time.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I remember when I first met you, you were a graduate student. You were finishing that PhD. We have a Philly connection. I got to add that too. You're from the world's greatest city. So we were talking about learning and teaching. We were talking about centering the experiences of Black children. We had a lot of conversation about Black education, but I wouldn't have thought then that you would be thinking about opening a school. Maybe you weren't thinking then about opening a school. I mean, when did this happen?
So yeah, like you say, we come up in academia, around the same time you're making a name for yourself. I'm finishing my PhD at UCLA, and at that time it was really just equip myself with the knowledge that comes with that degree, so that no matter what I decided to do, whether it be in a school, whether I went to academia, I would be able to move with a little bit more flexibility. And so the idea of a school came because I spent a good amount of time following my graduate program at an independent institution. Many of them tend to be what we call PWIs, predominantly white institutions. And it was a positive experience. It was a great apprenticeship in leadership. But what I found more than anything was that for our Black and brown populations, which often find themselves underrepresented, there's also this sacrifice that families and students feel that they have to make in order to get the top-notch education. And for me, that just started to wear on me. And I started to ask myself, do I want to continue to fight in this space for the wins that will allow for students to feel like they can present their full selves while pursuing excellent education? Or do I go off and take the leap to create an institution so they don't have to even make that decision? They don't have to feel like they have to leave their neighborhoods to, receive what, others feel is their birthright.
That is an interesting take. Now, you are a brother who operates from the left. You believe in the public good, particularly at a moment where the right has attempted to shrink the public good, shrink public access, shrink public resources. The kind of neoliberal approach to schooling is also prevalent. Why are you choosing to open an independent school rather than invest your energy and time in a public institution?
Yeah, it's a great question. And for me, it comes down to the idea that if you are tethering yourself to a public school district, then the ability to create the type of education that I believe Black students in particular need to feel like they can walk through school and be prepared in a way that allows them to see the world in a more global perspective, in a perspective that is less about the dominance of the United States, then that needs to be an independent institution, more like what we found in Reconstruction when we were forced to be in separate schooling. And throughout time, you've had people create these types of spaces so that the kind of education that befits a certain identity group and a certain social status can be achieved, right? So I think about Jewish day schools. I think about Catholic schools. Here in California, we even have, a small number of Armenian schools. So for me, it's just about the opportunity for communities to give themselves the type of education that they feel best fits their children, and not having, a lot of bureaucracy to tell you how to do it.
That makes a lot of sense. What kind of education specifically do our children need? Like, if you were thinking about what Black children need to have proper knowledge base, to be able to navigate the workforce or enter the workforce at some point successfully, and to have a healthy sense of a healthy self-concept, what kind of stuff gets us there?
So for me, I like to start with the idea that when you think about racial identity and its development, you start with this notion of, the encounter. What is that first thing that a child experiences that makes them realize they are, they exist in a racialized concept. So for many Black students, that often in schooling means their experience learning about slavery, or perhaps learning about the civil rights movement. But for me, where I would trouble that is that there is so much history of ours in the diaspora that exists before that, and history that allows for Black and brown children to see that their contributions to the world, exist way before we end up here in America in a much different concept. So for me, the kind of education that I think is lacking in many places is that education that highlights contributions of the diaspora, not just on the continent, but throughout, and allows for students to see and make the connections to who they are. Because if you can see yourself, like you read in my intro, then you are much better able to engage in the curriculum and exist in what is often a very competitive educational space.
What do you think about the role of testing in all of this? We live in a society where high stakes testing is super important. It's kind of in many ways, the measure of educational success in lots of ways, whether you scored this or that, whether the school scored this or that. Right. What does assessment look like in the ideal educational setting for you?
Assessment for me is a mix. It's a mix of demonstrated work to show that you are understanding and grasping, synthesizing concepts, but also some of the traditional testing so that you have a sense of where you are amongst your peer group. So I think, like you said, there is such an emphasis throughout education, from cradle to higher education, that a student has to be, able to participate in the exercise. But for me, and again, this goes to why independent, I'd like to reimagine how we get there. I'd like to start with a much stronger and broader foundation and skills without, a whole lot of high stakes testing, so that young people can really have the types of time to engage and make sense of things, fundamental structures like numbers, for example, before we start testing them in math, understanding letters and phonics before we start testing their literacy. That to me is important, and again goes to why independent. So I'm a person who skews on the side of less assessment, certainly in the early education years.
Interesting. When you think about scale, is your goal? What does the end game look like for your school? Are we talking about multiple schools in multiple cities? Are we talking about like a nationwide body of schools? And is there any danger in losing the local feel when you have too many?
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. So, right, you think about when you lay out that question, I think about something like KIPP, which started very local and now has become a national thing. And for me, I would much rather skew towards keeping Jabali as a concept very local and very distinct to Englewood, where we chose to be on purpose for a number of reasons. And then if others are intrigued and want to understand what we're doing, then by all means come and learn how to replicate it in your own space. Because I'm someone who's come to believe that one of the things that is troubling about public education, for example, is that we try often to take solutions in one place and apply them across a very broad spectrum when all of the spectrums aren't the same. All the spaces aren't the same. And so for me, I would much rather just focus on making Jabali successful in Englewood. And then if people want to take that into their own community and make it, then so be it. But I don't aspire to have Jabali as a national brand and become some kind of superintendent over, you know, a network of schools.
Somebody's writing in pink highlighter, I guess, adding on to my question about testing, and said, would the students need to pass standardized state tests?
No, not an independent school. They would not need to pass standardized state tests in order to continue to move forward. But again, I think it's important that you do have a sense of where students, you know, measure up against their peers, whether in public or independent schools. So, you know, I'm not one to say that there would never be a state assessment, but, you know, an independent school allows for us not to have to make certain state assessment markers, you know, in order to obtain funding, for example.
Funding is an interesting word. You're raising money right now.
Yes, sir.
The number is 250?
Number is that we're trying to raise?
Yeah, right now. I know there was like an initial fundraising goal, and then there's a long-term fundraising goal.
Yeah, so we were able to surpass that 250 goal in our first fundraiser last year. This year, we're going to bump it up, you know, and see if we can surpass that. And then, you know, we would like to be, you know, 10 million over the next 3 years.
10 million over the next. Why didn't you just tell me that, man? Where my checkbook at?
Hey, you know, that's why I came on, so we can get into that.
You know what I mean? As a matter of fact, I got, you know, I work for City University of New York, so this is all I have left.
It all works.
Look, man, but I got a lot more than that for you, brother. I'll make sure to make a donation to you, and I hope everyone else does too. I want to get to the how of that as well. Henry Jackson writes in and says, Wade Boykin, I'm assuming he's referring to Wade Boykins here, of Howard University, has done a lot of foundation work of centering education within an African perspective. Of course, for those who don't know, Wade Boykins is one of the African-centered psychologists who was a real forerunner in thinking about Black education. And one of the things that people like Wade Boykins talked about is the need to center African ways of knowing and being in educational systems. How important is that to you? And the reason I ask that is because I've seen schools with African names,
right,
that are very Eurocentric in perspective.
100%.
What does it mean to decenter Europe? What does it mean to center African people or Black people? However we think about diaspora right now, we can get to that too. But how do we think about centering us? What does that look like in practice?
I think for me, it starts with the idea that you look at the individual and you help them understand all that allows them to be. So, for example, I'm a Black American, multi-generational in that way. I married a proud Igbo Nigerian woman. And so that now is part of my two sons who you see over my shoulder there, part of their history, part of their, you know, legacy. And so for me, what Jabali will do is help them understand what that means. What does it mean to understand the history of African Americans? What does it mean to understand the plight and the journey of Igbo Nigerians? And how do you mix all that together so that you can walk in the world and understand how you connect to other people based on the struggle of your own? So that to me is how we center Africa, make the connections. Because if you look at the quote unquote diaspora wars that go on today, I find, and I'd be interested in your thoughts, Mark, that much of it is centered in misunderstanding and not understanding the connection that was lost, right? That was forcefully taken. And in many ways, you know, that disconnect is maintained on purpose so that, you know, we as Black Americans, for example, look at ourselves as a minority instead of looking at each other as the global majority, which we are.
I'm inclined to agree with that. I think there are people who cynically play on those differences, and it's not a lack for them. It's not a lack of education. It becomes a way to invoke a kind of nativism, a kind of even xenophobia in some of the movements I've seen. But I think at its heart, at its best, you're right. I think we lose sight of how we are connected in the ways that we could be connected. And that's why I think the work of African-centered psychologists like Wade Boykin, who, as Henry Jackson points out here, made his transition about 4 months ago. And in fact, his son is a brilliant psychologist who's at Yale now. And he was a student at Teachers College when I was a professor there. Great brother himself, and a great artist. But I think at its best, people like Wade Boykins would say, like, the idea of, or Carol Lee, if you think about, we could think about a whole generation of Black educators who took seriously what it meant to say, hey, Black people learn with verve. Black people engage in they use polyrhythms and polyvocality. Black folk have a social time perspective. These were things that African psychologists and Black psychologists used, not to explain deficiency, but to say that, hey, there's different ways of being in the world. How you show up in the world, to your point, John, informs how you learn. And if school only has one way of assessing how you learn and one way of valuing who we are, then of course people who are different are always going to look like they're less than. And that's why your school, I think, is such an important site of possibility to me. There's some things that people are going to want to ask nuts and bolts, like what kind of foreign language stuff we're going to do. Are we going to have debate and performing arts and I know you're going to deal with robotics. Just give me a sense of some of the cool stuff that people are going to be doing, or some of the traditional, not so cool but very necessary stuff that they're going to be doing.
Right. And so, listen, like I said, I've been immersed in the independent school space for the last 13 years, and at a place that had all of the things. Right. So folks would come and come to the school, and a lot of my conversation as a dean was about, well, you actually can't do all of this. You have to make choices. And so I understand the degree to which people want to have, all of the bells and whistles. And I very much believe in having things beyond what I call the comprehensive education, right? So you're reading, writing, and arithmetic per se. So performing arts will certainly be a thing. I'm a huge believer in the ways that performing arts, whether vocal or movement or visual, play into and connect to education. I played piano for many years, and that was something that my mother insisted on because it allowed you to see math and numbers and counting in a certain way. So dance, for example, will be something that we will have, and dance in a way that becomes more participatory for all. One of the things I find is that there's often a segregation of dance for young boys in particular. So how do we continue to involve them in that and give them a foundation to be part of that? The same for the vocal arts. I have found that one of the ways that students often get separated out is not necessarily because of their talent, but because of the ability to sight read. So making sure that is a skill that young people have. You talked about robotics. That is a fast growing industry. There are robotics tournaments that are as big as some of your favorite sports tournaments these days.
Yes.
For speech and debate. And so at Jabali, the goal will be to make sure that any opportunity that a student might find at their top tier independent school is also being offered at Jabali Academy as a training ground for advancement. Because what I have found,
including sports,
of course, I grew up an athlete. The predecessor for Jabali Academy was Roots of Knowledge Empowerment Institute, was a summer enrichment program where we not only introduced students to Black authors and literature and history makers, but also provided access to sports that we often don't get the ability to participate in because of money. So I grew up a swimmer, a money sport. We did tennis, money sport, golf, money sport. So those are very important to me, and athletics has paved the way for me to become ultimately a PhD. So absolutely, there will be sports.
Money sport. That's interesting that you say that, and I know what you mean by that. Some of these are activities that you have to have money, trainers, resources, that stuff you have to buy, courts you have to rent. You can't be poor and be in some of these spaces. That's the same thing for elite education in general. How do you ensure that poor kids can access this?
We fundraise our butts off. We develop networks of support. We access foundational support. We tap into a strong partnership with the city of Englewood, as we hope to, because we don't want this to be an institution that is only looked at as for the elite. We wanted to make sure that it has diversity across socioeconomics, certainly the diversity of the diaspora is an all-comers place. And so we will engage in all of the mechanisms that are necessary to provide that education for those who want it.
A question comes up from Toya Teachers that I think is a great question, and that is there a focus for special education? And again, for my audience, I just want to give a little context. And there are thousands of people watching right now, and tens of thousands who will watch this later. And a lot of people see these great charter schools pop up. They see these elite magnet schools in the traditional public system emerge. Then they see independent schools that talk about their academic success. And part of how they're able to garner such praise and frankly, to have such high numbers is they cream.
Scrum off top.
Yeah. And so if I don't have to admit anyone with learning challenges or anyone who has non-traditional ways of approaching things, or people who are neurodivergent, et cetera, then yeah, I can probably get better numbers in the school that has to take everybody and figure it out. So what do you all do with special education?
We're gonna figure out how we get there. We're starting very small. We're starting with a cohort of kindergartners. We are going to get to a place where we can make sure that we have learning specialists on staff so that we can attend to neurodiverse learners the best way possible. I'm a father of a neurodiverse learner, and so I know that journey all too well when you are seeing things and observing things with your loved one, with your child, and then have to figure out the best ways to develop a support structure around that. And again, to your point, your previous question, that takes resources. And so we're going to take that very seriously so that we can get to a point where if we have neurodiverse students that want to take part and apply, then we can say confidently that we have the support structures in place to make sure that they navigate the journey as any other student would.
Another thing that you all are doing that I think is interesting is this idea of looping.
Yes.
Talk to me about that.
So yeah, looping is the idea that you would stay with the teacher longer than 1 year. For me, it became something attractive to include, as a pillar of what we do, because again, we're starting so young. And so if you think about the ways and time that it takes to develop the trust of a young person, the idea that you would then start over again with each new school year and have to develop trust with the teacher, there's some learning loss in that time to build that relationship. And we know that education is very much a relationship-based practice. So with looping, you build in a little bit more time with the teacher so that you don't have that loss year to year, and you therefore can have, hopefully, greater gains in terms of knowledge and the ability to engage in curriculum.
The question here from Sam Corey is, do the teachers have to be licensed teachers?
Teachers do not have to be licensed teachers in an independent school, but we certainly will look for teachers who have a background that fits what it is that we are doing. So our foundational founding, I should say, kindergarten teacher, Kenya Strong, is a multi-degreed veteran of education because we take seriously what it is that we are doing starting with kindergarten. I could not be more serious about the foundation that we want to lay. And so you don't want to leave that to folks who don't have a deep understanding of what it is to build the curriculum that we're talking about and the ability to engage and connect with students so that at that critical age of development, they can move forward.
Let me ask one more question about that. Why? We know that content knowledge is important. If you want to teach history, you should really, really know history. You got a PhD in history or a master's in history, and that would probably satisfy that, right? To people who, and by the way, people with bachelor's degrees in history who are great teachers do just fine. But I'm just saying, if we were to say, hey, we want the sharpest minds in history, but some of them folks don't know how to teach.
100%. And here you talked about an aspiration, Mark. My actual aspiration for how we move forward beyond leaving the school is that we would engage in a type of reimagine teacher training so that it's not about just the license, because you and I both know that there are flaws in teacher education when it comes specifically to what often is called urban students, but I would make it even more specific and say Black students. And so for me, the credential doesn't necessarily tell me, like you just said, that you can teach, that you can connect. And so that's why, for me, it's not a prerequisite. It's more about what is your experience? What is the sum of your experiences in education that either allow you to be effective in the classroom or not.
Okay. African American studies for you isn't just a high school special course, not even an AP course. It's at the core of the educational model. I mean, you're going to be teaching African and African American studies from elementary school. What does that look like? What does African American studies look like in first grade? And I can already hear the culture warriors getting mad. I can already see the right wingers balling up their fists and being ready to talk about you on Fox News. What does that look like?
In first grade, that looks like understanding the stories. That looks like understanding some of the cultural practices, right? And so, me and you both, if we had been on here as the attack on CRT was going on with chuckle at the idea of hardcore CRT is not happening in the kindergarten or classroom. Are there perhaps principles that you can layer and spiral up? Sure, but the idea that students are being introduced to the great Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw in kindergarten, that's not happening. And so what does Afrocentric learning look like in kindergarten? It's understanding some of the stories. It's understanding some of the cultural traditions. It's understanding the ways in which you show respect for elders. It's really building a culture and then laying on top of that the content knowledge, again, with a greater emphasis than you see in most schools on the contributions of folks from the continent, in addition to those who are largely already considered part of the canon.
Sorry about that. Do you think that, how can I put this? There are other people fundraising to build schools.
100%.
Maybe the most famous one is Dr. Umar. I think there are people who will look at that example where he's had significant challenges to getting the school open. And I'm not casting any aspersions. I'm not being shady. I'm not being funny. I'm saying, like, look, whatever you think, it's taken a while to open FDMG. Has that made it challenging for you to fundraise? Are there people who are now looking at, I'm fundraising to build a school, skeptically or more skeptically than they otherwise would? Have you had any experience with that?
That hasn't been my experience, thankfully. We are blessed that Nkechi, my wife, and I were able to, purchase a building outright. And, we had a tenant in it for this last year while I, finished this last school year and was able to hand my oldest son his diploma as he graduated from high school this year. And now, thank you. I know you know that life. So,
oh, yeah.
To be able to do that was important, and now we can focus on making that building our own. So there are lessons to be learned from looking at Dr. Umar and others, because he is not even the first, maybe perhaps one of the more famous, but there are others who have had these institutions. They've unfortunately slipped away. Marcus Garvey School here in California was an institution. It is no longer with us. The Ujamaa School in Pasadena was a school out here, no longer with us. So my concern is about doing the things that are going to allow us not only to scale up and fill the school, but ultimately to make it an institution that has lasting power. And thankfully, my time out here as an independent school educator has meant that as we have embarked on this journey, that folks have believed in my record of advocacy for students of all kinds, and believe in not only what we're doing, but the team that we're building around us. I think that, if you are someone who's going the independent route in school, that having a strong board of directors is critical for survival. And we've been very intentional about how we've gone about building that team to help ensure our success.
When do you want to be fully up and running?
Goal is to be open for August 26th of 2026. So this is our 0 year, as you would. We're focused on admissions and finding 15 partner families for our first cohort of kindergartners. And we are happy to be able to move in a way that allows us to be paying our teacher and really taking our time to both fundraise and prepare the school and develop the curriculum so that come the first day, we're ready to hit the ground running.
What would you say to people who are skeptical? Make the pitch to me, right? I'm trying to write one of them big checks, not me personally, because I ain't got no money, but there's somebody out there who could write a $500,000, $1 million check for you. They're just skeptical of why we need another school. They're skeptical of why Jabali needs to be the model. They're skeptical of why we need to move away from charter schools or from traditional public school models. Make the case. If you had to make the 30-second pitch, what would you say?
Well, all those caveats you added in is going to be difficult in 30 seconds, but I'm going to try.
Take your time, brother.
But the pitch has a couple different prongs to it. The first part of the pitch is that when you think about students, Black students, boys in particular, I'm going to get personal and think about, again, the two young ones over my shoulder. You want to have a school as a parent that when your child walks in the door, a couple of things are true. One, that they're going to be safe. Two, that they're going to develop a respect for elders and understand how to behave in a school setting and connect with other peers in the school. Three, that they're going to learn and engage in curriculum that is going to allow them to move forward because of their demonstrated understanding and ultimately become successful global citizens in the world. So that's the case of Jabali Academy. The focus for us on centering the continent is not simply just for Black students. It really has impact for all students to understand the ways in which the continent has been a major contributor to the world. And so if you can develop an understanding of how to make those connections or the connections that exist to the continent, because there is no superpower in the world that doesn't have one. There are major superpowers currently continuing to pillage the continent. So to have that understanding makes one a much more effective global citizen. And if I can go back to Black students quickly, the idea that we are in a time when our history is forcefully being erased. There is no greater argument than to have a school that says, no, here we will cherish that information. Here we will continue to pass on those stories. Here we will help you understand how and why this is happening and how you resist and combat that. That's the pitch for Jabali Academy.
That's a hell of a pitch, man. Where do we go? How do we support? How do we fund it?
You hit up JabaliAcademy.org. You can do all the things. You can inquire, you can apply, you can donate.
I'm about to say, you got me wanting to apply, man.
You got little ones. Hey, listen, bring them on out. We'd be happy to have, say, the little hills in the mix. JabaliAcademy.org is the website. You can find us at Jabali Academy on Instagram, LinkedIn, the socials. You can follow me at Dr. Jon Carroll on Instagram, Jon Carroll on Facebook. I try to stay away from the space of X, Twitter. So many ways to reach out. I'm easy to find.
All right, y'all. You see it at the bottom of the screen there, JabaliAcademy.org. Make sure you go. Make sure you check out the beautiful. First of all, I mean, the website itself, when you go there, it's stunning. Just to see those beautiful Black children is amazing. The image is just, it's stunning. But beyond that, it gives you an opportunity to support, to invest in the future of our community. This is an amazing thing. Dr. Jon, can I ask you can I steal you just for a couple minutes to ask you just a couple questions? What do you see beyond your school? Just when we think about this era of Trump, where are we headed educationally? What do you see happening?
All I can discern is chaos. Again, if I were to add and have an additional 30 seconds onto my pitch about Jabali Academy is about finding a safe space in the chaos. It's the umbrella in the rainstorm, because you have a Department of Education that has been stripped. You have a school choice movement that is going to continue to undermine public education, because you are going to have a voucher program that is going to allow for families to take funds and go and try and find independent schools. I've always made the argument, certainly on my podcast, that those vouchers are almost like when you get a gift card at Starbucks, and you think it's a wonderful thing until you go to the actual Starbucks and realize it's $10 for a coffee and you only got a $5 gift card. you know, it only will do so much. So I think we are headed into an area where folks are really going to have to be discerning in the educational choices they make as families, because you're going to have continued um, cannibalization in the public schools that we consider working. They're going to get that much more competitive to get into, and they're going to be a number of schools that get left behind. In Englewood, where we landed, 5 schools just got closed, 5 public schools. And so I just feel like it's going to be harder and harder to navigate the educational path. And so for me, that's why I'm willing to take this leap to at least provide an option for families who want to have that both rigorous educational opportunity for their students so they can move forward, and also have the identity affirmation in a time where there's certainly been an attack on Black culture specifically.